Did you know that a lack of trust in the workplace can cost organizations up to 37% in productivity, while also driving up stress levels and mental health issues among employees? The American Psychological Association found that employees who don't feel trusted by their employers experience higher stress, lower job satisfaction, and are twice as likely to leave within the year. The impact on mental wellness is profound. When trust is absent, it not only erodes morale, but also contributes to burnout, disengagement, and feelings of isolation. And we all know that isolated teams are more prone to quiet quitting, where they disengage from their work while remaining physically present. Hi, my name is Ibrahima Abraham Sise, and I'm the founder of Heliona IQ and host of the Heliona Insight podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping managers and teams feel better and work better together. In this episode, I am so excited to sit with Dr. Cory Scheer, author of one of my favorite books, Closing the Trust Gap, to discuss the definition of trust, why it's so crucial in the workplace, key insights from his book, and also dive into identity problems within the workplace. Stay tuned. Today we have a very, very special guest. I know I say this all the time, but they're all special. But especially today, I've personally read the book. I'm currently shifting through the book, and I just realized it's breaking. But
gotta get you another copy.
Yeah, I know. I definitely need another copy. And the book, it's called Closing the Trust Gap, and the author is Dr. Cory Scheer. But first, before we get into the book, I always ask my guest this question: how is your spirit today, Cory?
It's very good today. It's full. Yeah. Thank you. I've got a very busy week, but every one of my meetings this week have been just an affirmation of the work that I get to do, which is to help connect people, as well as to help them understand maybe new ways to strengthen trust within their teams or their organization. So it's been a wonderful week.
Oh, I love that. And like earlier you did share that you were going on a trip. I think tomorrow.
Heading out this afternoon, actually. Gonna hop on a plane. So thankful for a beautiful day to travel. Lovely. And then we'll be landing there later this evening, and then 2 full days with a client, and then back on Friday morning.
Oh, nice. You were definitely living the entrepreneurial lifestyle that we see on Instagram.
Every day, every week is very different. Yes.
Right. That's awesome. So in your book, I'm just going to open to one of my favorite chapters, and then we will go back and you can define what it is. I just think starting here will be very important. And the chapter is called The Epidemic of Trust. And in the beginning, you talked about asking, a very big executive, a very important question around just the concern of trust deteriorating within their company. And according to your response, it sounds like it's whatever. Right. And this is something that I have always felt, even though I don't work in the trust space or like consulting space. I get to talk to a lot of companies and I feel that vibe a lot. Yeah. It's like, what can we do? We have too many employees. Like, what would you say to, someone with a big company, too many employees that they don't even remember their names? Yeah. How do they make sure that they don't have leaders having that answer to people that are wanting to help them?
Yeah, you bet. Well, the epidemic of distrust is unfortunately something that is pervasive in every industry, and many, many organizations struggle with it at some point within their history. The hard part about the work that we do on a day-to-day basis is that our schedules are not getting any lighter, our task lists are not getting any shorter, and the stakes aren't getting any less. So we are in a high stakes environment in every organization because there's a mission to accomplish. And so as a result of that, we need people. And when we need people to do the work, we have to create trusting relationships because trust is inherently relational. Right. And the challenging part about trust is that it's typically thought of as something that is more theoretical or philosophical or ethereal. But the hope, and where I spend all of my time in my vocational context, is to help people understand the structural elements of trust. Once you understand the structure of something, you can then begin to measure it. Once you begin to measure it, you can begin to change it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And like one thing that you mentioned, which I like remember a chapter a little bit down in your book. I know I did say we're going to define trust, what it is and why did you write the book? But I think it's very important to like address that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of companies at that stage they very much care about like, being able to measure how do you trust people? Like what are the processes in place that you share when you talk to these big CEOs and these big executives?
So the premise of the entire book is based on a theoretical framework that I utilized to process my data in my doctoral work.
Right.
And the theoretical framework was constructed by some researchers in the early 2000s. They were evaluating the retail space and the airlines, and they were looking at what are some of the contributing factors that cause customer loyalty. And they initially thought that it was going to be primarily about value creation and the value proposition. But what they found was that the value proposition is actually the mediator between trust and loyalty. And so it emerged for them this really interesting dynamic of what are the structural elements of trust. And what they found, there are three primary structural elements of trust. We call them the building blocks of trust. The first one is competency. Competency includes technical ability, communication skills, financial literacy, project management, time management, risk management, those types of things. The second building block is problem solving. So not only the ability to solve problems, but also the ability to identify the right problems to solve.
That's
and
big.
Then third is demonstrating care for others. So this is where you see things like empathy, sympathy, active listening, caring for the needs of the whole person, mental, physical, social, psychological, vocational well-being. In a corporate context, what we see with our data, with our own organizational trust assessment, the building block of care for others is typically the weakest in a corporate context. So back to the beginning of what you were talking about, of how you've experienced that, they may have been highly competent people committed to solving problems, but if they were not demonstrating care for you, there was a breach of trust.
Right. No, it's so like funny that you said that, because I'm looking at like the exact company that's their building right here. I'm not going to say their name, but yeah, thank you for that. And I do want to go back to the book. Like, why did you? I have an idea because I've read your book already.
Yeah.
Like, why did you write it for people that don't know? We can start from there, and then I also want to go into what exactly is the trust gap for you and people that you get to work with.
You bet. The reason why I wrote the book is because I learned as I founded and I began my company, and as my company has grown, I realized that as busy as I was, it was impossible for me to be in every room that I wanted to be in. And so the book is actually intended to equip people who I might never actually be able to work with.
Right.
And for them to be equipped with this framework. I ultimately wanted it to be helpful for as many people as possible. The gap itself, there are actually a couple of trust gaps that prompted me to write this. The first one was, so there's three specifically. The first trust gap was the gap in trust that people have for their leaders. And what we found in our research, I co-authored and conducted with Kurt Bartolich, with Brent Certain, a national survey. And we found that only 51% of employees have a high level of trust for their leaders. So that gap of 51% to the ideal of 100%, that's significant. The next big gap was we found that the perception of trust from leaders of their own leadership versus what frontline employees felt of their leaders, that gap was 31%.
Wow.
So the perceptional gap was a significant.
Right.
But then the third gap, which is what we measure with our trust assessment, is to identify everybody wants to be at a level of 100% trust within their company, but what is their actual current organizational trust score? And so through our assessment, we're able to identify that and then identify the gap between where they're currently actually at and where they want to be. So those are three of the big gaps that prompted me to write the book.
Wow. I mean, yeah, thank you for that. Because I, just me listening, I went through something very traumatizing for me as a leader who hired almost 60 plus people about 2 years ago. And I felt literally just like your book, the cover here, how the bridge collapsed and everything fell. I also experienced that. So those stats are like 51% of the company, lacked the trust in me as a leader. And it was just something that I didn't know how to deal with, because again, I wasn't trained to even hire that big company. I was just a guy with a camera,
Right.
that got a really big. I got really lucky, and I got really big contracts. And then all of a sudden I needed to hire, and I was just calling friends and just be like, hey, you want to work with me?
Yeah.
And then I hired all these people. Number one, they are my friends. So they've known me in a different light. So they didn't really have the respect for me to manage them in the first place, but the money was good. So they were showing up.
Yeah.
So I, fully relate to what you said. And I do want to talk about the 51% though, because I feel like that's a huge cost for a company.
Yes. Gigantic cost.
Not knowing that 51% of your team don't trust you, and someone who works with a lot of Gen Zs in that space.
Yep.
Most of them are just leaving. And I'm sure with you, in your experience, you do see that. What exactly is the cost if you were to sit next to a company and be like, this is what's happening and this is the cost?
That's a great question. There's a few costs that are specifically felt with measurable KPIs, where it's interesting. I've yet to meet a company that actually thinks about trust as a standalone KPI.
Right.
And that's one of my missions with my organization, is to help change that narrative, that trust is something that can actually be a measurable KPI.
Wow.
But where we see breach of trust or the epidemic of distrust beginning to affect other organizational KPIs, the first one you just alluded to is retention. When trust goes down in an organization, the level of staff retention drops substantially. So people will leave. This is as evidenced in 2022, the Great Resignation. It was 50.5 million Americans left their jobs.
Jesus.
That's a third of the workforce in 1 year. So, I mean, just the cost of that alone is unbelievable. The other thing is the cost to rehire somebody.
Oh, yeah.
With the research has shown that can cost between 1 to 2.5 times the annual salary of the person that is left. So imagine having, even if you could just adjust that retention rate by an uptick of 2 to 4%, the overall cost savings would be significant.
Right.
The next is just overall employee loyalty, loyal to the mission, loyal to each other, loyal to the work. That has a dramatic effect when there's a lack of trust. It goes down. Third is the advocacy of the employees to other potential employees or to customers. So the advocacy or the referral ability of that particular employee. And then the final thing, Abraham, that we found that was fascinating was Kurt and I found from the data that people admitted that when they had a lower trust in their leaders, they literally got lazier in their jobs.
Right.
They chose to work less hard. And think about the dynamic and the effectiveness, how that, as that drops, how that costs a company. And not only in the actual expense side of the ledger, but also in the opportunity cost, creativity, innovation, enhancements, new product development, research and development. All of those things are going to be affected when you have a lack of trust, because people, they're less willing to work hard.
Wow. As we were talking, I remember reading it somewhere, and it says that more than 75% of employees during COVID were dealing with burnout or stress, and usually it's from them losing trust in their in their leaders. And just like hearing you speak, I feel like even though that was COVID, I think that's still happening till today. And I think most companies aren't aware, but us who are continually reaching out to these companies, especially in my case, I feel like I see these all the time, because my entire message to it is trying to have companies understand the cost of not addressing mental health.
Yes,
and it's a big problem. And I do love that you have that in your book, because me reading it, I can tell that even though you're talking about trust, at the end of the day, you're talking about the human cost of not taking care of them. Is there something specific in your process when you talk to these companies that you address when it comes to, just the human cost of not addressing their well-being, which you kind of alluded in your earlier response?
Absolutely. So when we think about the three elements of trust, the structure of trust, those three building blocks, competency, problem solving, where mental health and full comprehensive well-being of a human falls squarely, is really in that building block of care for others.
Right.
And that's where, even I had a client call earlier today, and I introduced them to the concept of what an empathy map looks like, of asking those critical questions of, because sympathy and empathy are different. Sympathy is something that you and we've both experienced.
Right.
Empathy is not necessarily about how I feel. It's about my willingness to put myself in your shoes.
Right.
And by doing that, by actively listening, by caring for your needs, I can then ask myself, what is this person seeing?
Right.
What is this person hearing? What are they feeling? What are they doing? What are their pains and what are their gains?
Right.
As I begin to uncover that and show my willingness to step into that space, I'm demonstrating a care for that person, which that's a huge element of mental health and mental well-being is the fact that people don't feel alone in their own space, but that they have somebody that is willing to be empathetic with them.
Right.
And
I
so
love that.
the comprehensive care for others, that falls squarely within that building block of a critical element of building trust. It's vital. And when we do not have that, we may have a very efficient, highly productive organization, but if there's no care for our mental, physical, social well-being, there will be a breach of trust, and it will have a dramatic effect on individuals as well as the team.
Right. And even with me, like one of the things that I see is like usually when a company lacks trust, I notice that the employees are a lot more isolated because they're literally planning to get the heck out of that company.
They are.
And this is something that I come across a lot sometimes when I talk to marketing. And I'm not going to name companies because lately that's been a common theme with this conference that we're working on. Whenever I talk to marketing, and then they're like, well, sales will want to do this, but we don't want to talk to sales. And then I'm just like, but you guys are working with the same company, like just email sales, and sales is also trying to avoid marketing at the same time. And to me, it's like, I don't necessarily know how to address that, because usually I'm like, hey, just sign the document. Right. Like, we got stuff to do, please. And I'm always cut in the middle. And sometimes whenever I have an opportunity to talk about the company, I don't recommend even people working with them. I literally just did that 2 days ago. Someone saw that, like a logo on my website. They're like, hey, can you connect me? I'm just like, don't do it. It's a waste of time. The employees don't necessarily care about, any vendor or any, like new account. It will take forever. They will delay your process, and they don't communicate. And which is coming from me, who's already working with them. So imagine what's happening like internally.
And that's where what you're experiencing is, and this goes to the definition of trust. So my favorite definition of trust is that trust is the firm belief in the truth of something.
Right.
If marketing and sales and the executive team and the operations, if they have different versions of the truth,
oh wow,
that's if you have literally a gap in the truth of the reality of that company, those gaps are where it becomes much more difficult for me to believe in that, because now, instead of me believing in one clear shared truth, what do I have to do? I have to believe in 5 versions of that truth.
That's exhausting.
That is completely exhausting.
Right.
And so one of the most important questions that a leader or a team can ask is, what is our truth?
Right.
Are we on the same page? Are we co-creating a new version of the truth?
Interesting.
And as we do that, are we communicating that same version of the truth internally and externally? And if not, what is preventing us from defining our truth? Right. And that, Abraham, is what I think is a significant opportunity for everybody to not only self-evaluate. I need to ask myself the question, what is my truth? Then am I working with somebody, and do we have a shared version of the truth? And if not, what is causing that gap? How do we fill it? How do we become more competent? How do we solve the problem? How do we demonstrate care for others?
Right. Wow. And even with me, like to your point, but back then when I had that experience of hiring way too many people that I didn't need, I just wanted to work with my friends. And back then I was also a lot younger, so I was very like inexperienced. But one of the things that I apply today is like when I hire anyone, first I want them to understand like, hey, we're working on this project. This is not my timeline or your timeline. We're working on a massive problem.
Yes.
And if this is something that you were coming in hoping that to accomplish this, hang out with all these cool people and make these amazing things, this is probably not the space for you. I want to be honest with you. However, we may have like massive, like pushback, and that's okay. It comes with the territory. And I want you to understand that this is going to take a while, because we're trying to address a big problem that's bigger than all of us. That's something that I like to lay out, number one. And then number two, I'm like, however, if you want to come here and work for a temporal time and find a different position, that's fine too, because I need help.
Yeah.
And this is something that I apply when it comes to action, because my experience was very traumatizing. It was insane. I've never had that much mental, like anguish in my life. And I went through a lot of trauma, but imagine almost half of the team, almost 30 plus people were all angry. And it was just like, and I remember going home just telling myself, but I'm doing this trying to help people. Now everyone else is like, saying all these things that I'm not a good leader. And I'm saying, but I felt like I was.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of leaders also get caught up in that. And because I, especially someone who calls myself now a chief empathy officer, I try to lead with that. And I think most leaders also are going through that, but they don't have the space to communicate that. Like, how can they be vulnerable with their teams when they're going through that? Because that's something that back then I didn't have the skill set to do so.
Yeah.
Is there something specific that you share with these leaders?
Well, that's where I think the power of any kind of a framework, a framework that it's memorable, it's replicable, it's true, it's repeatable, and it's something that you can share with other people, obviously within your team. So this is where, if you think about, if you have 100 different definitions of what the word trust is, or my iteration or your version of it or whatever, or if we only think about trust in actually the opposite side of it, which is more toxic experiences or traumatic, that's where an opportunity is to first begin with a shared framework of trust. These three building blocks: competency, problem solving, and care for others. They exist within the realm of people, but also within the realm of policies and practices. But that simple framework, which we talk all about in the book, that's something that I call the back of a napkin framework, that you can draw it out on the back of a napkin to where it's not about a book up on a bookshelf that you don't have. It's about, we can remember it. So then as we look at that framework, we can then begin to evaluate where are the gaps? And then how do we move forward collectively to define the new truth, and then moving forward to work towards that end?
Interesting. Yeah. And like a question that came to my mind is like, I feel like, when it comes to like establishing trust in a company, I feel like, attaching that to a long-term goal, it's very, very important. Because I think that's probably what most companies are missing out on, understanding that, this is what trust look like. And this is what we want to accomplish in the next 10 years. And I know you did mention that in your book at some point. I don't remember what chapter, but can you like refresh my memory, or the listeners just kind of explain why trust is so paramount to attach to a long-term goal?
Well, it's critical, because if there is a shared version of what the future can and should look like, now it takes those immediate near-term challenges and struggles, and it actually reframes it into the context of a longer term vision. So for example, if you have something that you're looking towards 5 years from now, knowing that between now and 5 years from now, your strategic objectives are going to change, and there's going to be new information that you're going to gain, and you have to adjust accordingly. But if that becomes a shared vision, even a co-created vision, now all of the things that are laddering up to that or moving towards that, it puts that into the proper context, versus it being completely reactionary, or worse yet, trying to preserve the way things used to be. That's the reverse of vision. Protecting the status quo is the reverse of vision. Protecting the status quo is purely about maintaining what it used to be, because we think that is the actual version of the truth, when that can help inform our future, but it does not have to define our future as only being the status quo. Yeah,
like the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
That's very common, I feel like, in like corporate America, even though that's true, but it doesn't apply when it comes to different generations always churning in these massive generational companies.
But if there is a new version of the truth for the vision of the company, we may need to appropriately break down that old version of it and then reconstruct it so that it is pointing towards accomplishing that.
Interesting. So how does a company make sure that they still maintain, let's say, 100-year-old truth or a vision and apply it to a newer generation? Because I work with a lot of Gen Z folks, and they usually come in with the reason why they want to work for a company. Usually it's like, for example, with mental health, because that's the space that I'm in, most of them are finding companies that would benefit their own mental well-being. So they require for companies to actually adjust to their needs, because most of them understand that they can just go and start a company. And I'm one of them, because I used to work for a massive company, and I was managing like 3 different departments of marketing. And I was like, I can do this myself. And I don't like to come in every day at 8, 7, leave at work at 7 and be there at 8. And this was back in LA, so traffic was crazy too. I was like, I just want to wear my PJs and sit home and work. And I remember telling my mom a long time ago, she was like, you need a job. I was like, Mom, I'm in my PJs sitting on my bed and I just made like $500,000. You're telling me to go to work. What do you mean? Right. So it's like, like most of us in that generation, late like millennials and Gen Zs, and even the next generation, I feel like they're probably going to be even more interesting. It's like, how does a company that's like 100 plus years old, it's like adjusting to those people that may eventually become competition to them?
Yeah, part of that begins with understanding who it is that you're working with. So going back to the whole area of care for others, if I have a clear understanding of why is that important for you, why does that reality for you, how does that allow you to feel like you're thriving, that you are taken care of?
Right.
That may be different from my version of why I work in the company that I do. But the fact is that just by having awareness, just by asking appreciative inquiry questions, by listening actively, at a minimum, I'm showing you the respect that you absolutely deserve. And if there is perhaps an opportunity to meet in the middle or to create a new shared version of that truth, that's going to be helpful versus my way or the highway, or they have to adjust, or this generation, It's like, no, it's not about that. This is why, going back to your earlier question, why the new vision of the company is so critical. Then bringing together the people with their own version of their truth, co-creating it towards that vision. That's where you begin to get traction on a healthy workplace culture.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I like that. I feel like a lot of people will like find value. I do have a lot of, like women CEOs that usually listen to this podcast, or, some are like business owners, like business leaders, because I pay attention to like all the metrics and see who they are. And most of the time their question when it comes to, in the workplace is not necessarily even about their business. It's about them being a woman working in a male dominated space and having that trust for the company and feeling safe. Do you have something to share? And I know that you're not a woman, of course, but as someone who works with people, and I think just reading your book, I feel like you also speak to a lot of women audience as well, and just watching your content online.
Yeah. So I think the key for any time that you're wanting to identify some of those gaps, you have to assess first. And that may be a detailed assessment, organizational trust assessment, or even asking the question, if we were to draw a spectrum of toxic on one side of the sheet of paper or trustworthy on one side of the sheet of paper on the other side, where do we land right now? Is it in the middle? Is it towards toxic? Is it towards trustworthy? And then which way are we currently moving towards? That could be a very simple way to begin the assessment process. Then it's about applying and adopting a shared framework of trust. Then it's about creating a plan, holding people accountable, elevating the opportunity to strengthen workplace culture in the same way that we elevate the opportunity to make revenue. Increasing your priority towards workplace culture is vital. And the beauty of that is, in the end, the stronger your workplace culture, probably you're going to advance your other KPIs even better. That's at least what the data says.
Yeah. And like another question is like, how do you keep, let's say a massive company? Because like one of the things that I feel like, most companies don't realize is that every high level, like operative or like manager creates its own separate culture within companies. So how do you make sure that that trust is kind of aligned across all of those people that are different person creating different cultures, and how do you keep them accountable?
Yeah. So going back to the framework, number one, is there a strong communication competency that is occurring throughout across departments? And is that pointing towards the shared vision, the shared reality of the future? Number two, are there any concerns, any problems right now that we need to be either addressing, anticipating, predicting collectively, not just departmental? And then finally, collectively, even though we are working within our own spaces, our own departments, how do we ensure that we are demonstrating care within our departments, but also cross-departmentally, and being extremely intentional about that? That's where I would begin in terms of my approach and strategy. Hey, Brand, that's why I'm so grateful for the work that you do, is because when I think about you, your passion and your goal is to ensure that people never feel alone. No matter the challenge, there are other people that will relate to them, that will be empathetic and will support them. And you're creating the spaces and the places for that to formally occur. It's incredible.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know it's like I sometimes get lost. And I remember earlier you were like you kind of asked me a question about just everything going on, like what's one thing that I'm looking forward to, and I didn't have anything positive to say because I was like, this is so stressful. But like, thanks for the reminder, because I do tend to forget that, which again, the trust part is like, I created all this because I just felt super alone in my journey of trying to find help. And it was just not a good place I felt like it's not a good place for anyone to be in. But then we create it and it becomes the thing, and then other people are attached to it, and then we forget the why. So thank you for the the reminder. From now on, if anyone asks me, so what's the one thing that you're looking forward to? I'll definitely remember that. So thank you for that.
You bet.
Yeah, and again, we're getting to the end of this conversation. This is definitely has been one of my most favorite conversations, because I get a lot of questions from our community about like running a business a lot. And I feel like people always forget that is a big, like, empathetic piece, and, building trust. That's super, super necessary for a business to operate. Because at the end of the day, we're all working with people.
That's right.
And do you have anything that you want to share before I ask you the closing questions?
Yeah. My encouragement is just to, when you are thinking about the trust dynamics within your team or your company, begin with yourself, asking yourself the questions: am I being as competent as I could be?
Right.
Am I solving the right problems? Am I demonstrating care for others? Then extend yourself grace. We're all human. We live complex lives.
Right.
And then appropriately step into a space of vulnerability where you can learn from others, ask them for help, co-create a new version of the truth moving forward, getting clarity on what matters most. Those are just some very initial steps, but I would always encourage anybody, begin with evaluating yourself, but do it with a really critical dose of grace in that as well.
Oh, wow. I love that, because at the end of the day, it's like we just project the things that are deep within us that we're not dealing with, either that's conscious or subconscious. So thank you for that.
You bet.
I have two questions. These are like funny questions that, I just write up. And the first one is, if trust-centric was a superhero in the world of organizational development, what would be the superhero character, and what would be its superpowers?
Oh, my goodness. An actual superhero character.
No, yeah, like people always get frozen when I ask them that question. They're like, wait, what? Now I got to think.
I need to bring my 13-year-old son, Evan, into this conversation, because he is, we actually just went to Comic-Con, so he knows all the things. Gosh, superhero. I'm going to say, for whatever reason, I'm going into the Star Wars realm. And so maybe it's kind of a Han Solo character where it's somebody that is focused. They are technical in their ability. They can fly the Millennium Falcon. Right. But also there's kind of that soft inner core that truly does care for others. Safe. So there's like this kind of interesting balance between the two.
Safe and like assertive.
Yeah. On my flight this afternoon, I'm going to think about that, though. I may have to report back to you. In regards to the superpower, I think the superpower is the power of focus, is the power of clarity. It's allowing the right kind of data help shape what matters most, which is ultimately building and strengthening a foundation of trust, so that everybody within that organization, internally and externally, can flourish.
Right. That's a superhero right there. Because at the end of the day, people need that guidance. And I think having the right leaderships or the superheroes is very paramount. And then the final question is, if all your work on trust and leadership had to be summarized in a catchy song, what would the title be? Would you give us a sneak peek by humming a few bars?
Oh my gosh. I definitely don't think I could do the second part of that.
I don't look at any of this question until the day of. So I'm just like, thank God it's not me.
I don't even know where to begin with what the, I don't know. I mean, it would have to be an anthem that is inspiring and maybe kind of I think about like the outro from M83, like that kind of epic, because trust when it's strong is completely epic within a company.
Nice.
I think I think the title of the song would probably be called Beginning Again with Trust.
Actually,
I think there's a lot of individuals
that sounds like another book.
They're desiring to begin again and they don't necessarily know where to start. So my biggest encouragement with them would be start with trust.
Wow, I have a feeling that's another book, because they're closing the trust gap, beginning again.
Beginning again with trust. There we go.
Well, that's your next book, and you've heard it here first. And again, how can people find you if they want to either buy your book or just hire you as someone to speak at their company, or just get to know you?
Yeah, a couple of ways. Number one, super active on LinkedIn. Love building the community and the network there. Number two, my website, trustcentricconsulting.com, or also Instagram at trustcentric. And so those would be the primary ways to get a hold of me.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. This has been a very, very fun conversation. And in closing, I want to share a message of hope for all the frontline managers and future managers out there. Think about all that you are instead of all that you are not. You are capable, brave, and significant, even when it feels like you are not. You face countless challenges, but remain resilient. You've been hurt, yet you still stand proud and smile for your people. Embrace your journey, cherish those who uplift you, and remember, your worth is defined by the kindness and strength you show yourself first. Your imperfections make you unique and resilient. Keep shining because the world needs your light. Thank you for listening to Heliona Insight. Until next time, keep inspiring.